Royal weddings in the early 16th century were extravagant affairs that would make modern Instagram influencers blush with envy. The marriage at St. Paul's Cathedral between the Prince and Princess of Wales was particularly spectacular, though one might say it was less something borrowed, something blue, and more something red, something new, with all that crimson decor. The preparations transformed St. Paul's into what could be called the world's fanciest catwalk, a magnificent elevated walkway stretched from the west doors to the chancel, covered in red cloth and decorated with gilt nails. It was quite the DIY project, though I doubt they got their inspiration from Pinterest boards. The walkway stood at head height, presumably to ensure the royals wouldn't have to worry about anyone trying to photobomb the medieval equivalent of wedding photos. The nave featured a grand stage where the main event took place, with the clergy positioned strategically below, medieval event planning at its finest. The newlyweds, dressed in matching white, before it was cool, performed their carefully choreographed hand-holding walk. Talk about relationship goals. When even your hand-holding needs rehearsal, you know you're dealing with some serious royal protocol. The atmosphere was electric, with musicians positioned in the vaults like medieval rock stars, creating the perfect soundtrack for this royal romance. The crowd went wild when the couple turned to face them near the sanctuary, a moment that would have broken medieval Twitter if it had existed. Whether there was a royal wave or a sneaky kiss remains a mystery, though I suspect the clergy were too busy ensuring their robes looked good for the historical record to notice. Young Henry, already showing star potential that would make modern celebrities jealous, was perfectly suited for such grandeur. With his tall stature and natural charisma, he had that royal influencer vibe before social media was even a twinkle in humanity's eye. Even Erasmus had noticed his regal bearing, though he probably didn't expect Henry to later become the original swipe-left champion of European monarchy. Young Henry stole the show at his brother's wedding, first as the dashing escort for the bride, then as an impromptu entertainer when he threw off his fancy gold gown to dance in his jacket. His parents probably thought, at least he's not beheading anyone yet. When Henry's time came to tie the knot, the circumstances were quite different. With his family members having taken their final bows from life's stage, the 17-year-old became King Henry VIII. His first executive decision, "I do," to Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow. Talk about recycling royal relationships. The wedding venue was drastically downsized from St. Paul's Cathedral to the Queen's Closet at Greenwich. It's like going from Wembley Stadium to your grandmother's living room. Cozy, but perhaps not what you'd expect for a royal wedding. Greenwich Palace boasted two Queen's Closets, the Privy Closet and the Holiday Closet. The Privy Closet was sandwiched between the Queen's chambers like a holy sandwich filling, complete with a screen divider. "Why have one room when you can have half of one?" said no one ever. Every weekday morning, the Queen would kneel for Mass in the Privy Closet, being appropriately pious. Meanwhile, Henry treated Mass time like we treat our morning coffee break, catching up on correspondence. "Dear Pope, about that divorce." The Holiday Closet was the VIP section of the Chapel Royal, an enclosed balcony split between King and Queen. It's like having premium box seats at the theatre, but with more praying and less popcorn. While commoners entered the chapel through the ground floor, how pedestrian, the royal family had their elevated entrance. It's the medieval equivalent of having a separate Instagram filter for the royals. The contrast between Henry's two wedding experiences couldn't be more stark, from dancing sensation at his brother's grand celebration to a quiet ceremony in a closet, though he'd make up for it later with 5 more weddings. This intimate wedding set the stage for one of history's most dramatic royal soap operas. Who knew that saying "I do" in a closet would lead to breaking with Rome and creating a new church? Talk about relationship complications. Looking back, perhaps the modest venue was a sign of things to come. As they say in royal circles, start in a closet, end up with a church of your own. Henry certainly knew how to turn a small ceremony into a revolutionary affair, A fascinating glimpse into royal life reveals a private first-floor gallery with special chambers called closets, where royalty could attend religious services in comfort. Complete with fireplaces for warmth and grills for privacy, these spaces allowed the king and queen to participate while maintaining their dignity, using spiral staircases to reach the altar when needed. The marriage of Henry and Catherine in 1509 likely took place in the Holy Day Closet, built by Henry's father for Queen Elizabeth. Though she never used it, this space served as private as the everyday privy closet. The contrast between Catherine's marriages is striking. Her first to Arthur was a grand public affair in London's heart, while her union with Henry was secretive, occurring in a palace far from the city's buzz. Only 2 witnesses can be named with certainty: George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury and Lord Steward, and William Thomas, a groom of the Privy Chamber. Their positions granted them rare access to these private royal spaces, making them perfect witnesses to this intimate ceremony. The marriage required special oaths beyond typical vows, necessitated by the unusual circumstance of Henry marrying his sister-in-law. These additional promises address the diplomatic and legal complexities of their union, though much about the ceremony remains unknown, including the identity of the officiating clergy. Here's a royal joke to lighten the mood. What did the king say when he got locked out of his closet? "I'm having a royal flush of bad luck." The details we do have about this secretive wedding only came to light during the divorce proceedings 2 decades later, through testimonies provided by Shrewsbury and Thomas. Their depositions offer a rare window into what was otherwise a very private affair. The closets themselves represent the delicate balance between public duty and private life in royal existence. These spaces allowed monarchs to participate in religious ceremonies while maintaining their distance from the general populace, a physical manifestation of their unique position in society. The architectural design of these spaces speaks volumes about medieval royal life, the careful consideration of privacy, comfort, and ceremonial requirements all wrapped into one sophisticated solution. The spiral staircases served as both practical passages and symbolic transitions between private and public spaces. This tale of Henry and Catherine's marriage perfectly illustrates how royal unions often balance political necessity with personal privacy. Their story shows how even the most powerful people in the land sometimes sought discretion in their most important moments. The whole affair reminds us that royal life, despite its grandeur, often sought moments of normalcy and privacy. Like the saying goes about happy and unhappy families, perhaps royal families too have their own unique way of managing their private lives, sometimes behind grilled windows and secret staircases. King Henry VIII, the original serial spouse, was quite the wedding planner, if by planning you mean keeping things hush-hush. You could say he was the master of the royal elopement. Talk about relationship troubles. By the end, he was complaining about marriage giving him headaches. Guess 6 weddings will do that to a king. Like a man who found his favorite restaurant, Henry kept going back to the same venues for his weddings. Except for that one time with Anne Boleyn at Dover. Everyone's allowed one destination wedding, right? He stuck to his favorite spots: Whitehall, Greenwich, and Hampton Court. It's like the medieval version of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The guest list was more exclusive than a modern-day celebrity wedding. Only the cool kids from the Privy Chamber made the cut. It was so exclusive, even the paparazzi of 1500s couldn't get in. And the clergy. They were like the original wedding planners, but with more holy water and less Pinterest boards. Speaking of the clergy, they were quite the VIP officiants. Roland Lee, Thomas Cranmer, and Stephen Gardner. These weren't your average, "I now pronounce you guys." They were the royal inner circle. It's like having your best friend get ordained online, except these friends had actual churches. For a king who loved music more than most people love their pets, the weddings were surprisingly quiet affairs. No trumpets, no choirs, just the sound of Latin being spoken. It's like having a DJ who only knows one song, and it's in Latin. The vows were said in English. How thoughtful, starting with a simple yay. Not exactly I do with fireworks, but it got the job done. Henry would go first with his vows, probably because nobody dared to make the king wait his turn. The queens had to add that extra spicy promise about being bonny and buxom in bed and at board. Talk about setting expectations. It's like adding, must be good at cooking and CrossFit, to your wedding vows. These ceremonies were so private, they make modern secret celebrity weddings look like Super Bowl halftime shows. No crowds, no fanfare, just a handful of people watching the king say, I do. Again, and again, and again. The whole affair was like a royal version of Groundhog Day. Same venues, same guests, same vows, different queen. Henry had his wedding routine down pat by the end. He probably could have done it in his sleep, and given how early some ceremonies were, he might have. The marriages might have been private, but they certainly weren't boring. I mean, how could they be with Henry, 6 times lucky, the 8th involved? It's like he was collecting wives like some people collect stamps, just with more beheadings and political drama. King Henry VIII put a ring on Anne of Cleves with an inscription reading, God send me well keep. Talk about setting expectations low. That prayer had a shorter shelf life than Henry's leftover turkey legs. 7 months and 1 awkward dinner later, Anne handed back the ring like it was a hot potato, suggesting it be broken into pieces. Looks like that ring had about as much staying power as Henry's New Year's resolutions. The big question floating around like a royal feast's aroma was whether Henry viewed marriage as worthless as that ring. His attitude towards marriage was as unpredictable as English weather, sunny one minute, stormy the next. While historians claim private royal weddings were the norm, that's like saying Henry started the trend of royal divorces. Oh wait. The royal book, basically the medieval version of Marriage for Dummies, was passed down through dynasties like a family recipe nobody wanted to lose. From Lancastrians to Yorkists to Tudors, it was the ultimate guide to How to Royal 101. You could say it was the original self-help book, just with more crowns and fewer inspirational quotes. The book split royal ceremonies into 2 categories: the divine stuff, like coronations, and the baby-making business. It was basically a royal family planning guide, complete with instructions from conception to churching. Speaking of churching, 40 days after childbirth, queens were freed from pollution. Medieval postpartum spa day. Anyone? Marriage kicked off this whole reproductive relay race, and the royal book was kind enough to offer kings a choice: private or public wedding. It's like choosing between a quiet dinner or a full-blown feast, except with more political consequences and fewer menu options. The guide assumed the queen would be a foreign princess, who'd get a welcome party that would make modern red carpet events look like casual Friday. It's like planning a destination wedding, where the destination is an entire kingdom. The coronation would follow faster than you could say, I regret this decision. Take Margaret of Anjou, for example. She arrived in Southampton like a medieval celebrity, got hitched at Titchfield Abbey, keeping it casual, and then boom, coronation time. It was like a royal triple header: arrival, wedding, coronation. The 15th century equivalent of binge-watching a royal drama series. Henry's approach to marriage was about as consistent as a court jester's routine. You never knew what was coming next. He treated the royal book's guidelines like a buffet menu, picking and choosing what suited his fancy. Private wedding today, public execution tomorrow, could have been his motto. The whole thing reads like a medieval soap opera, with Henry starring as the leading man who couldn't decide what he wanted. The royal book tried to bring order to the chaos, but Henry was like that one guest who refuses to follow the wedding planner's schedule. In the end, Henry's marriages were like his famous codpiece, impressive to look at, but ultimately more show than substance. While the royal book laid out all the proper procedures, Henry wrote his own rules faster than a scribe could update them. You might say he was the original royal influencer, starting trends whether people wanted them or not. Let's dive into the royal drama that was Henry VIII's love life, where "till death do us part" sometimes came sooner than expected. You might say he was the original creator of the Bachelor Tudor edition. Picture this. Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn got the full royal treatment with magnificent coronations. Talk about starting with a bang, though Anne's ending was more of a chop. They say the third time's a charm, but poor Jane Seymour never got her crown thanks to a plague. Guess you could say her coronation plans went viral. Margaret's quiet wedding was like finding a silent moment at a heavy metal concert, rare and precious. Meanwhile, Henry's later queens had to settle for the 16th century equivalent of a meet and greet with the court. It's like getting invited to the after-party instead of the main event. Henry treated his marriages like a personal Pinterest board, all about his satisfaction. When he didn't like the arrangement anymore, he'd swipe left faster than a modern-day dating app user. Though instead of ghosting, his preferred method was, well, let's just say it was a bit more permanent. The king's marital drama had England doing more flips than an Olympic gymnast. He changed the entire religion of England just because he couldn't find Mrs. Right. Talk about commitment issues. Most people just change their Facebook status. Despite appearances, Henry wasn't treating marriage like a game of musical chairs. He was more like that friend who's too picky on dating apps, always expecting perfect happiness. When contentment wasn't enough, he'd start browsing the noble ladies' profiles again. His approach to marriage was surprisingly modern, minus the whole beheading thing, thankfully. He wanted marriage to make him happy, not just comfortable. It's like expecting every day to be like your Instagram feed, perfectly filtered and absolutely fabulous. The consequences rippled through England like gossip at a royal court. His kingdom, church, and children all got front row seats to the drama. It was like a reality show where nobody wanted to be the star, but everyone had to participate. Each of Henry's 6 wives brought something unique to the table. Some brought their heads, others managed to keep them. Catherine Parr was like that smart friend who survives a horror movie. She knew when to play it cool and when to run. In the end, Henry's quest for marital bliss turned into history's most dramatic dating show. While modern couples worry about prenups, Henry's wives had to worry about pre-executions. Guess you could say his approach to marriage counseling was a bit extreme.